Welcome back. We're looking at how the increasingly interconnected world might cope with what seems to be a pending global economic crisis. Joining us from Bristol in the UK is Pettifor, a fellow at the New Economics Foundation. And from Austin, Texas, we have economist James Galbraith, the Lloyd Benson Chair for Business and Government at the University of Texas. Just before the break, we had a call from Bart in New Zealand who was asking why should we trust the experts who got us into the mess in the first place? Pettifor, if I could put you, who can we trust now?
Well, that is a good question. I think we have to trust those who've been put in charge of of acting as guardians of our nation's finances, if you like, and those are our central bankers and our policymakers in finance ministries. We've lost a lot of confidence in economists and in mainstream economists because they have got it badly wrong. But if I may, I'd just like to take issue with Dr. Galbraith because I want to come back to this point about the international financial architecture. The fact is that countries hold US dollars because they have no choice. And the arrangement whereby the financial architecture was so constructed that countries held dollars and treasury bills as assets, as reserve assets, was also an ad hoc arrangement in 1971. When President Nixon defaulted, if you like, on the United States' obligations to repay its foreign debts in gold. And the period between 1945 and 1971 had been a period of extraordinary stability. But since 1971, we've had the build-up of the United States deficit and also periods of increasing instability and volatility. So there is a direct correlation between the ad hoc way in which the international financial architecture was constructed in 1971 and today's financial instability.
Dr. Galbraith, it was interesting. We've got a question which might tie into some of the comments that Pettifor is making about the way policies have been. A lot of people are wondering, and James in our chat room, live station chat room, which is taking place right now, is asking, how do you regard the policies, the economic policies being put forward by President-elect Barack Obama?
Well, I think we're moving in a hopeful direction, and we're moving in that direction in a methodical way. We are going to have to deal with the basic problems of the American economy here, which are problems of the housing sector, trying to keep people in their homes, to end the foreclosure crisis, problems of the crisis of state and local government finance, problems of the shortage of capital for public infrastructure investment, both at the state and local and at the federal level, the shortfall in incomes being faced by the elderly, the general shortfall of incomes being faced in the country, and the industrial crisis. So there is this crisis has a lot of ramifications and aspects in on the domestic economic policy front. And what you're seeing right now is the assembly of a team which is going to have to come to grips with that crisis in the months ahead. For the moment, I'm quite encouraged and hopeful that they're moving forward. I do say I don't put any trust in central bankers and certainly not in finance officials, particularly ones who, as in my country, come to us from the Wall Street institutions which gave us this crisis, although I don't fault them. I'm not criticizing their motives on a personal level. It seems to me that we do need to pay attention, a little bit more attention than we have paid, to the small community of economists that actually did analyze this crisis correctly, that foresaw what was likely to happen. And if you do speak to that community, you will find them, I think, really quite strongly sympathetic to the approach that's unfolding in Washington now. It's going to require a very large intervention in the form of increased public spending, public capital investment. That's the direction that we understand we have to go in. I was very actually pleased, though, to see that the G20 communique called upon all countries to take that same general approach. And even though the G20 didn't accomplish very much, in that respect, it set a tone which seemed to me also was a hopeful sign for the larger community.
Now, just a quick thought: do you believe that America needs a new deal, Dr. Galbraith, in the same way Franklin D. Roosevelt tried to pull America out of the Depression with the New Deal back then?
To the extent that the private financial sector is not going to finance growth for the foreseeable future, it will fall to the public sector to do so. It's not a question of whether we have a new deal or call it something else. It's just a question of the practical necessity that if you don't want to be faced with mass unemployment and the collapse of both public and private institutions that maintain our economy, the public sector is going to have to step in and do things which it has not been obliged to do for many decades.
And Pettifor, I know you advocate a Green New Deal for Europe. That seems to be more of a long-term prospect. What about getting relief right now for the way things are panning out in European countries?
Well, this is the point that we make in the Green New Deal, which is that there are less expensive ways of stabilizing the economy than simply spending more government money into the economy, and one of those is to, if you like, put a floor under the housing market and a fall under the collapse of asset prices. And the best way of doing that is managing borrowing cost, and the cheapest way of doing that is by managing monetary policy across the board, not just base rates. And so we would say, as Roosevelt did in 1933, that monetary policy should take precedence, and that what we should be trying to do is to be putting a floor under house prices, because it's the continual fall of house prices which is actually exacerbating this crisis. We might have to write off debts. I think we're going to have to face that, and I agree with Dr. Galbraith that we're going to have to increase incomes, because one of the reasons why people have borrowed is because they didn't have enough money to buy, for example, their homes, and now they don't have enough money to pay off their debts. So in order to stabilize the finance sector, one of the things we may have to do is raise incomes.
Ms. Pettifor, an email question, if I may put to you, which touches on some of the points you've made. From Kansas, Deborah Plummer wrote in saying, can we have a world-regulated economy? We need one, but are the wealthy countries willing to give up their status and power? I mean, who should be regulating capital flows and interest rates?
Well, I think that's a very pertinent question.
It's for you, Ms. Pettifor, sorry.
Sorry, I think that's a very good question, and I think, yes, we can. I mean, Keynes at the end of the Second World War proposed that we should have a global independent central bank, which acted in a sort of fair and balanced way in clearing checks, if you like, between nations and in settling balances between them and managing their overdrafts, to put it simply. But we've moved away from that independent and balanced approach to one which is very heavily dependent on the financial system of one country, the United States. So we need to return to a more balanced global financial architecture in order to restore stability.
Dr. Galbraith, I know you probably want to go ahead. You want to chip in on this?
Let me come in on this, because the principle here should be no global finance without a global regulatory system that is effective. We have allowed a system to grow up which is infested with tax havens, infested with regulatory havens, which has basically allowed a large part of the financial system to operate in a way which is extremely conducive to abuse and to fraud, as well as to tax evasion. This system is not viable. It has to be brought back under control. And to the extent that we don't have an effective regulatory system, then we have to limit the amount of global interchange that there is. But I think it should be possible to expand the scale of effective regulation to the scale of the system we would like to have. That's the way I would like to go.
Dr. Galbraith,
I don't think that monetary policy can in fact do this job. Keynes in the early 1930s was prepared to work through the central bank, but by the middle 1930s, he realized that Roosevelt was in fact right. You had to do this with public expenditure. In the 1930s in the United States, the New Deal employed 60% of the unemployed population directly. It was a huge enterprise, but it was necessary because the private financial sector was essentially defunct at that point. Actually,
Dr. Galbraith, there's less than a minute, and I want to put an email question to you on this. A viewer wrote in from Florida. Steve wrote in saying, what nation will come out on top during this recession? And I wonder if China's in the equation here. What if China continues to push down the value of its currency? What global impact will that have?
Well, what China is doing right now is increasing public expenditure on the order of 10% of Chinese GDP per year for the next 2 years. The country which is most effective in mobilizing its home resources to build its own economy is going to gain the most. I don't think it's necessarily a competitive race here, but is going to do the best in the current crisis. I think the United States has that capacity. I worry about whether a collection of 27 European countries can effectively coordinate along these lines, whether you need a new European architecture possibly through the European Investment Bank, to make Europe competitive, make Europe effective in combating the crisis in a similar way.
Right. Well, Dr. Galbraith and Dan Pettifor, thank you very much for being with us. We're out of time, but on the next show we have the outspoken US Congressman Ron Paul giving us his view on the economic crisis and the priorities he feels the incoming Obama administration should be focusing on. Also, you can catch us all next week in Mumbai, India's commercial capital, looking at what's in store for a country that's rising to be an economic giant. We'll be coming to you at a special time all next week, 1400 hours GMT. And that's all from me and the team. We'll see you next time.